conversations. Hey, how's it going, Brian?
Pretty good. How you doing tonight, Kevin?
Not bad at all, man. But I had an interesting subject. Why don't we discuss whether you should have a side hustle in addition to your main job? Well, what do you think?
Well, I think it's really important. I've been thinking more about getting into stuff like real estate, just to have another source of income.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Like your buddy Logan, right? He's
Yeah,
uh, he's doing real estate, or he's trying to get into it now, right?
yeah. He's been studying for I don't know his exact progress, but he's transitioning from tech to real estate, which is interesting.
Right. He's transitioning, and he passed his broker license in his state, right?
I'm not sure where he's at in that journey, but I know he's definitely pursuing it, which is, I mean, interesting considering how much tech can pay. But I think the
Right, yeah, because
instability
what is
of
it,
tech.
isn't he pulling in? Isn't he pulling in like 150, 160 a year as like a architect of some like what do they call it? Solution architect? What's that called? Oh, I think you cut out on me there, Kev.
Oh yeah, I just got disconnected. You can hear me now.
Yeah, now I can hear you.
But yeah, I'm not sure exactly how much he's making, but it's into the six figures easily. But even with that, it's like you still need something else because the price everything is raising so quickly that a tech salary alone you can barely afford a house, or you might not even be able to afford a house in the life.
Yeah, one of my buddies, he works in the game industry. He was living in Southern California, LA, and I mean he's making pretty good money. I think he's making like 140 or 150 a year. But even him, he was like, I need to get out of LA. It's too expensive. So he moved up to Seattle area, I believe.
Yeah, and Seattle is also like expensive as well. So it's a little bit of an improvement, but like you're probably gonna have to have like a second job or find a way to supercharge even that 140, 150.
Yeah, no, I mean that's the thing. Seattle is also very expensive, but it's just very telling of how expensive Southern California is if Seattle's looking good to you, you know?
Exactly. And after taxes, your each of your paychecks is like maybe like $5,000 if you're making around that amount of money. And
Right.
your mortgage could easily be like 5,000 in LA or more. So that's like half of your paycheck gone just to that.
Right, exactly. But yeah, I've been thinking potentially starting up a side hustle or real estate. I'm not really sure exactly what's involved. Like, I wouldn't want to do rentals. I would want to sell houses, just like, from the very beginning. I want to sell houses. Like, I know my sister was doing real estate in Brooklyn, New York, a couple of years ago, and all she was doing was rentals because they said basically, at least in New York, so many of the places are rentals, and they're not, like you're not buying the place, you're not buying the apartment, you're renting the apartment.
Yeah.
So like most of her business, because she was based in New York, was rentals. But I know she asked about how do you get, like how do you move up to that next tier of selling houses or selling apartments in New York, and they basically told her like you need to build up your network of clients. You're like you have to build your warm network to a level where you could actually sell some houses, like to know more like high net worth individuals. So that's pretty much the knowledge I got from her about that.
Yeah. It seems like everything ultimately, revolves around your network. Like, even,
Exactly. And I think your buddy was mentioning that he's like, he has like, a good amount of high net worth clients or friends that he knows that like would be interested in real estate, or it sounds like he's already building that network, or he already has that network of people to market some products towards.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure if he's going to jump in, he already has a decent amount of people he knows that can, he can sell houses to, whatever real estate
Yeah,
he's doing.
well, and I think that's kind of the advice that they're giving my sister at the real estate place she was working at. It's like, look, you're green, you're a small fish in a big pond in New York, so you got to like start to get some connections, start to get to know some more high net worth individuals, people who can buy property, people who actually want to buy and not rent. You need to meet these people somehow. Like, you're not just going to pull them out of a hat. Like, you need to make connections with these people somehow. So they basically told her, like, through the rentals, you'll eventually build up like a warm network of people who are ready to buy property, and then that's how you jump into selling homes.
I mean, like even with something like this podcast, this is a great source of meeting like professionals who have money to buy houses. So like, if you're doing something like real estate, starting a podcast might be a good thing just to be able to meet people.
Well, yeah, and certainly, this podcast, I would say, is one of my side hustles. I do a couple different things besides this. I'm a musician and drummer, professional drummer, drum teacher. So I'll do session work with other bands. I haven't played out live in a while. I used to do that a lot, though, when I was living in LA. And then I also compose video game music. So I've got like three, four, five. I think I have 4 albums released on my Bandcamp, and outside of that, I used to work in tech. I worked in programming for a little while. Then I transitioned over to technical recruiting. Then I left that. Now I'm doing primarily doing drum lessons. So it's kind of like, I've got a couple different side hustles all at the same time. And yeah, like you mentioned, the podcast is a really great way to network, to get to know people, to just, to expand your warm network. Having a podcast is definitely a great option.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are going to have to start putting themselves out there because of just relying on the traditional means. Oh, I just got this job. You could be let go at any time. Like a guy at my church, he's been in tech for a long time, but he's been unemployed for over a year. He just found a new job.
Oh, I believe it. Like when you go on LinkedIn and you're just looking through the feed, like so many people are open to work. So many people are getting laid off. It's just like that seems to be the trend these days.
Yeah, and a lot of people, including me, they're doing like Uber Eats or Uber to kind of make money in the meanwhile, but that doesn't pay a lot, and I feel like the rates are slowly declining because they got so many people who are trying to do Uber or Uber Eats.
Right now, when you were in between your programming jobs and you were doing Uber Eats, like on average, how much were you making an hour? Do you remember?
I mean, it's really not much. It's Uber Eats probably, you work 8 to 10 hours, you make like $80 or something, $100.
Okay, so you're averaging like 10 bucks an hour.
Yeah, you're really not averaging a lot, and then you got to take out the gas, the wear and tear on your car. You might have to get an oil change.
Right.
So
because they're not covering any of that extra stuff.
No, they're not. So you have to pay for it. So I was doing Uber Eats because my car, it wasn't like it didn't qualify for Uber because I had like a 2-seater car, a sports car. You need like a 4-seater.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah. So you didn't have the type of car that you could use for Uber or Lyft.
Yeah, regular Uber actually pays a good deal more. Maybe like you probably end up making double compared to Uber Eats.
So you can make like 20 an hour with driving Uber?
20, 25, something like that.
That's not bad. No, it's not bad at all. I mean, considering that minimum wage still in some states is only like $10, right?
Yeah, exactly. The only downside is it puts a lot of wear and tear on your car, so you have to factor all the mileage in, like
Yeah, because
maintenance.
that's talk about side hustles. When I came out of the tech industry and I was just kind of like burnt out on it, didn't want to work in tech anymore. I started working part time, delivering Chinese food for a local restaurant here in Long Island. And yeah, that did really not pay very much. They were paying, under the table, so it was off the books, so no taxes taken out. But they were only paying me $10 an hour, and I'm in New York. New York, the minimum wage is 15 an hour, because they weren't paying me on the books. They didn't have to meet that requirement, but also they weren't covering like any of my gas, oil change, anything like that. Like that was on me to cover. And after a while, I realized like I'm really not making that much money. I'm spending a lot of money on gas.
Yeah, it's pretty predatory. They're just using your car up and not paying you anything really. Like they would
Yeah, at the
incur
end of the
more.
day, I really was not making very like I don't know what I was making an hour when you factored in tips and you factored in gas, but like it couldn't have been more than $10 an hour, I don't think.
Yeah, when you factor in all the costs, you're probably making more like $4 or $5 an hour. Because if your car breaks down,
That's the
then you,
sad truth of it. Yeah, and I remember like one of the last nights I worked there, I got sideswiped as I was pulling into the parking lot, and so then I decided to just use the money from that side swipe and not get the car fixed and just kind of coast for a couple of months financially.
yeah, and it's sad that we have to resort to this, but it's getting harder and harder out there for people. So people gonna have to start being more creative. Like, say you're a programmer, you might have to start a consulting business, take projects on the side. Because, like, even the easy side hustles to get into, like Uber and stuff, they're not really paying you anything that's going to help you get ahead. It's just keeping you afloat pretty much.
Yeah, and then like, obviously a side hustle like with podcasting has a huge range of like the type of money you can make with it, from like smaller podcasts making, well, I guess making nothing, to then you have someone like Joe Rogan who signed like multiple $1 million, like $200 million deal through Spotify. So you have a large range when it comes to income you can make with a podcast. But certainly in the beginning, I think it's really all about expanding your network, growing your warm market network, and just trying to network with people in industries that are creative. Like a lot of the people we have on here, they're either from one of three industries: music, tech, or what's the third one? Music, tech, or games. Primarily, we've been getting on here. So that's been interesting to network with these people, get to know them a little better, have some of them back on like future shows. So, I mean, in general, that's been going pretty well. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, like, if you think past just the simple dollars and cents, you're able to reach out to people you would have never been able to talk to before. Like, as a musician, you're able to talk to somebody who composed for like a Star Wars franchise, somebody who composed for
Oh yeah.
Rush Hour. Like, where else would you
Or
be able?
like we had on that guy from Meta pretty recently. Was that a couple weeks ago only?
Yeah, Meta.
Yeah, we had Meta on, and he was talking about my music. He's like, "Oh, I heard you're drumming," and you were like, "That's pretty cool." A guy from Meta checking out your music, like that doesn't happen every day.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing about the podcast is like people do research into who you are and what you do. So You can't just hit them up like, hey man, check out my video game album. But since you're on the
Right, because that's what
podcast,
I used to do. Like before, well, I guess we were very like early on in the podcast, and I didn't know like how serious it was going to be, how much time it was going to take up, et cetera, et cetera. So at that time, I was also kind of like in between jobs. So I was just networking on LinkedIn and sending people a link to my video game music. But like you said, it's kind of like you hit someone up, you're like, hey, like check out my album. They're like, well, like this feels like a chore. It's not like really something they're looking forward to. But once we started doing the podcast, you're like, hey, like pitch the podcast, and then through that you can grow your music business or your teaching business. And at first I didn't see that, but now I can see the light in it that yeah, we have had on guests where like they've checked out my video game music or they've checked out my drumming, and they're like really appreciative of it, and maybe they're going to tell other people about it. So you really never know. Like it's just the podcast is a good jumping off point for a lot of different things.
yeah, exactly. Like you got to start off with something relevant in your podcast to them, and then whatever your secondary thing is, you put that in the background and let them discover that. It
Right,
has to do
because
with
I mean
relevance.
we have all our links in every show description. So like if someone wants to do that background work on us, like look us up on Google, see what we're all about, like they can we're easily giving people access to that information. Like we're linking my website for drum lessons, we're linking my video game music, we're linking, I guess, your LinkedIn profile, right?
Yeah, I think I got LinkedIn. I got the Coder Combos website on there. I don't really have
Right.
that.
You got the Coda Conversations website.
I don't have the consulting stuff I'm doing linked up, but I may put that in later. But I mean, I
Okay.
probably should put it up now, but I already got so much stuff on my plate. It's like I don't know if I want to take more.
Yeah, no, I can understand that because you're working full time as an Angular developer, correct?
Yeah, full time as a software engineer. I got some part time, like consulting work I'm doing with software. Then got the podcast, got stuff I'm doing for church. Like there's a lot of
So you're
different
busy.
stuff. Yeah,
You
exactly.
got a full plate. Yeah.
So it's like, do I want to take on more now? I don't, not really.
Yeah, well, it's like for a little bit there, we were doing 3 episodes a week. And I
Yeah,
think, we were both feeling like it's kind of a lot, like it'd be one thing if the podcast was our main hustle, but because it is a side hustle, it's like, all right, like this can only take up so much of my time before I'm going to get burnt out on it.
yeah, and I think you always have to make sure that what you're doing on the side, especially, is fun. Otherwise, you're really gonna get burnt out because there's typically time when you should be relaxing.
Well, and then also like any business, they say the first like 1 to 2 years, like don't expect to make any money.
Right, right.
Expect to be putting money into the business, not gaining money out of it. So like with this podcast, I think like, we're at a point where like we do the content is there, the guests are there. It's just the sponsors aren't quite there yet. We haven't gotten that type of interest, that level yet where sponsors are interested. But I feel like that's right around the corner because, like I'm saying, yeah, we have Meta on here. We're going to have Amazon on here, I think, in a couple of weeks. We had NVIDIA on here. What else? Def Jam Records. Um, AMD. Did AMD cancel or do we do the AMD interview?
No, they canceled. We had Nvidia.
Okay, yeah. AMD canceled, but we did the NVIDIA one. And I think we did a panel
Yeah,
of guests on that one. So that was really cool. But yeah, what I'm trying to say is like we've had some really big names come on already. We have some big names coming up. Like we have Universal Music coming up. We have Bethesda coming up. I'm working on getting HBO.
Yeah, we got a nice lineup, man. But yeah, it's gonna turn into something. You just got to stick with it.
Yeah, so I guess that's my point. Like, if your side hustle is taking up too much of your time and you're not really, either you're not getting paid from it or you're not getting paid enough, it's going to start to feel like a job. It's going to start to feel like not a side hustle, but like your main hustle. And then if you don't have the money to stack up, it's going to be like, you're going to feel like, well, I don't really want to do this.
Yeah, but I think on the other hand, you also have to treat it. If you want your side hustle to become your main thing, you have to treat it like, a job almost, because the level of effort you put in is going to require.
Yeah, I mean that's why I look at it like starting up a business. Like
Yeah,
that first year or two, you can't really expect to make any money. Like you've had this podcast for what would it be 2 years now?
yeah, like over 2 years, so it's been a while.
Yeah, so like we're right at that point. I know I only joined you maybe 4 or 5 months ago, but like just in terms of the longevity of the business of the podcast, you've been around for about 2 years. We're right at that point where businesses start turning a profit.
Right,
So it makes sense that it's probably right around the corner.
exactly. Yeah, it's coming. Like uh, it only takes the right person seeing it and saying, "Hey, we want to do work with you." Like somebody, if you really want to be successful, somebody has to open the door for you. But in order for them to open the door for you, you have to have something there.
Yeah, I was told that once by an actor in LA. He was like, I was like, how did you get into doing movies and stuff like that? And he's like, well, honestly, it took a lot longer than I thought it was going to take. So it took like 20 years. And he said, ultimately, someone has to take a chance on you, what you just said.
Yeah,
Someone's got to take a chance on you to let you, into that side door to get into the industry, and that's not easy because a lot of people don't want to take a chance on people, because if they do recommend someone, like this happened to a friend, they recommend someone and then they mess up, and then they come back to you like, oh, thanks a lot for recommending Joe Schmo, he did a terrible job. So like my buddy Josh, who works in music, he was like, yeah, I recommended this guy one time for a gig. He totally dropped the ball, and then it like reflected poorly on me. So it made me, not want to really like put my neck out there for people.
yeah. If somebody puts their name on the line for you, then you have to deliver, because otherwise you got to make them look bad. Like, hey, you recommended me this guy.
Yeah, so I think that's where the hesitation comes from, finding the people who are going to open that door for you,
Yeah,
because they don't, just like we're talking about, they don't want to get burned either. They don't know like the guy they're recommending, they don't know if he's going to be successful at the job or even qualified enough to do the job. Just because you're friends with someone, it doesn't mean that like they should be working at your company.
right. Exactly. That's the quickest way to ruin relationships. Hire your friends and family, because a lot of times they'll take it easy because, oh, this is my this is my brother, this is my friend, so I get to chill out a little bit.
Yeah, like growing up, my dad owned his own business, and like if I was ever like homesick from school, but like not actually sick, just like staying home from school because I didn't want to go, he'd be like, "Okay, Brian, you're coming with me to work," and I couldn't really say anything because I'm sitting there at home. I'm not sick. I'm not in school. So he's like, "All right, well, if you're gonna stay home from school, you're gonna come to work with me." But I learned a lot from going to work with him. And what I learned is that like it's really tough to work with family. Like you're saying, like there's a lot of arguments. With my dad, it was more like a dictatorship. It's like, okay, you got to do X, Y, and Z in a very particular way. He did carpet cleaning and windows for wealthy people, primarily in Connecticut.
Oh wow.
And I remember, like, at some point he was like, "Oh, do you want to take on this business as your own?" And I was like, "I have, I'll just be honest, I have no interest in that at all."
Yeah, it's not really your thing.
And it's funny though, he was able to sympathize with me. He's like, "Yeah," he's like, "I guess if I was your age, I wouldn't want to do this either."
Yeah, you can probably see like, hey, you want to explore and try to chase your dreams a little bit before just going to the thing that makes you money.
Well, yeah, he knew how dedicated I was with music and to music and being in bands and touring. Like, he saw that drive in me really young, and he always fostered that drive. He was always very, like, he would drive us to shows when I was in punk bands in high school. Like, he'd drive us to Danbury. He'd drive us to Greenwich. He'd drive us to different places to play shows. And I really respected my dad for that, because he saw something in me that, like a flower that needs watering. He saw
Right.
that drive in me, that potential in me. So he decided to water that plant. And I think because of his confidence in me, it gave me the confidence to move out to LA and try to do music professionally.
I think that's an important thing about your side hustle, something that you enjoy, because it's hard to do work outside of work if you don't really like what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing about a side hustle. Like, it has to be interesting to you. One of my buddies, this guy Sean, he's like a blues psychedelic rock guitarist based out of L.A. Orange County area. He was working as a bartender, but he said there's a lot of drama working at bars. Like, there's just a lot of drama you get involved in, and like, he's really chill, laid back, Southern California kind of guy. He doesn't want drama in his life at all. So he finally quit. He was like, "I'm not going to bartend anymore." And he started his own car detailing business. So he's pretty bright. He's pretty innovative, resourceful to even be able to do that as a business. Because that last time I talked to him, like, how's the car detailing business going? He's like, it's going well enough to pay rent. So it's impressive.
Yeah, like he was able to find a way doing something he could, like, he might not have loved that, but he was able to tolerate it more than the bar job.
Yeah, like he had interest in it. It's, I think, maybe something he did on the side. Like, maybe at one point it was a side hustle. I'm not really sure. Like, I haven't talked to him too much about it, just because, like, we don't talk as much now that I'm back on the East Coast, because we used to jam all the time in LA, in downtown LA. We get together like once a week and play. So, I used to talk to him all the time. Now I barely talk to him, just because, when you're on different ends of the country, it can be hard with the time change. And then, with having a girlfriend, having a full time job, like, it gets harder and harder to focus on people who are not right there in front of you. Like, I don't know
Right.
if you've ever experienced that. Like, you're real close to someone, but then you move or they move, and then you kind of lose touch.
Yeah, man, that's pretty much story of life, man. People get busy, they get families, and they get get a new circle of friends, so they just pretty much end up focusing on what's in front of them.
No, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there about families. Like, people start their own family, they get a wife, they have a kid or two, they have, they're forming their whole family unit. And, like, usually, like, some single guy is not really going to be a part of that picture.
Right, right, right. Yeah, like at that point, the wives might be like, "Hey, why are you always hanging out with this single guy? Like, what are y'all doing? You have a family?"
Right. Yeah. What, are you going out to bars together? What are you
Right.
doing?
Exactly. And, with kids especially, like, you know, most of the hanging out stops at that point.
Right. Well, because like I think it makes me think of my sister, who she's recently married. She's got a little girl who I think is a little older than one now,
Oh,
and she commands on like 100% of my sister's time, 100% of her energy. Like she visited with her husband here a couple months back, maybe like 5, 6, 7 months ago at this point, and she was visiting with her kid and her husband, and I saw how hard she was struggling with like not getting sleep at night, having to nurse constantly. Like it took. I had never seen her this worn out in my life, and I'd seen
right.
her under some pretty stressful circumstances. Like she used to live in New York and was trying to be an actress, and so I've seen her really struggle before, but nothing like this. Nothing like what kids put you through the ringer, you know. So she's really going through it right now. But I guess the reason I'm bringing this up is that I don't even hear from her as much like I used to. So and it's not personal. It's just like people they grow their own family, they have their own family unit. They just it's not like they're trying to disconnect from you, but just naturally you kind of end up getting more distanced.
Yeah, you just have to prioritize and focus on, your raising that kid or taking care of your spouse or whatever. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
it sucks as a friend, but it's something that you gotta kind of like just come to expect. That's just like the way it is. Like, like you notice, like our parents, they didn't really just sit around hanging out all day. They were raising us, so it's like
Right.
we like to think we're not gonna fall into that cycle where, oh, it's just your family. You don't hang out with friends, but you do. It just naturally happens.
Yeah, well, I remember my mom telling me that when I was younger, because I was like, oh, how come you don't really like hang out with friends or like really do anything like outside of the house? And she was like, well, you'll find that as you get older, people kind of like section themselves off and, they just start doing things with their own families. And she's like, it's not personal, but people just end up losing touch,
Right.
and like, so I think like with my buddy Sean, like we're really close. Like if we were together in the same room, we'd be able to talk for hours about, whatever. But because I'm not in the same state anymore, I'm not in the same time zone, it kind of gets lost in translation. So like we're not as close anymore, but if we were again in the same state or whatever, in the same county, then we would reconnect, just like it's yesterday.
Right.
But
Right.
I think, yeah, given the space and time apart, it does put a strain on relationships and friendships.
Right. Yeah. It's part of growing up, unfortunately.
But yeah, my mom used to always warn me about that. She's like, when you grow up, you're going to see people divide off into their own families. And I was like, yeah, I don't think so. Like, I'm still going to have my best friends when I'm older. She's like, well, don't bank on it.
Right. Yeah, when we're young, we think we know it all, but when we find out like what we think and what it turns out to be is completely different.
Yeah, what's like that saying, like, life has to be lived forward, but it can only
Right.
be understood backward.
Right. Yep. Like, yeah, I think that's why it's important to listen to people who's been there and done that, instead of being like, oh, I'm so smart. I already know it's going to go how I think it's going to go.
Well, there's a lot of knowledge and like seniors. If you like actually like sit down with a senior and talk to them about their life, about their experiences, work, relationships, there's definitely some knowledge in there for you to gain if you're open to hearing it. You got to be open enough to take in this information from people.
Right. So to kind of close this off, man, like what advice would you give somebody, like, especially like in their 20s or something, in terms of like the importance of starting a side hustle in addition to their main job? Like, why should they, and what options should they look at?
Well, why should they? I'd say because there's not the same type of job security as like our parents' generations had, where like you join the union and you're taken care of, or you become a flight attendant and you're taken care of. Like that same job security no longer exists. So my main thing would be like, okay, first of all, for your main job, try to get a bachelor's, try to figure out, sit down, really think about what would you be good at doing and what do you have at least some interest in, because you have to have some interest in what you're doing. Because I found out, doing programming, I was just doing programming for money and I burnt myself out on it very, very quickly, because I didn't enjoy it. I didn't like the constant learning that comes along with programming. So it just wasn't really a great option for me. But yeah, the advice I would give someone in their 20s or early 20s is okay, go get a bachelor's, and maybe like if you do want to do programming, get a bachelor's in computer science. If you want to teach kids, get a master's in history or art or something like that. But yeah, I would say, do that for your main hustle. And then on the side, like I teach drum lessons. If you play an instrument and that's something that interests you, teaching, because I really took to teaching. Some people, they teach out of necessity, but I always enjoyed it. I started teaching at 18 and I'm 37 now. So it's been around 20 years of teaching. And it brings me a lot of joy. I know some people, they look at it like, oh, I want to perform live. I want to do studio sessions, in the studio, hang out and record and stuff. Like they're more so on that side of the fence. But I always really enjoy teaching. And I think, yeah, if you do play an instrument, teaching music lessons is a great side hustle because it's really good money. I charge $80 an hour for an hour-long drum lesson, $80. So that's not bad. I mean, you only need, I'd say like 10 students, and then you're making $3,000 a month. And that could be considered a side hustle. 10 hours a week is not full time. So, you could technically make full-time money with a side hustle. You just have to believe in yourself enough to actually get out there and do it.
Right. That was good advice.
What about you? What would you, if you could go back in time and meet Kevin at, 19, 20 years old, what would you tell him? What would you warn him about?
Well, I would say don't chase the money. Like, for example, you say you don't like tech, but me, I got my degree in accounting. I didn't like accounting, never was able to study it enough to feel competent. So, it was just pretty much 4 years of like a wasted degree. But, it's not a complete waste because most jobs just want to see a degree, like a bachelor's degree in something before they hire you. But
that's huge. Yeah, even in tech. I mean, a lot of people will try to say, oh, you don't need a degree to break into tech, but like it definitely helps.
yeah, like you don't necessarily need a degree, but for some jobs they're gonna disqualify you if they don't see one. But like pick something that has reasonable job prospects and that either you love or you like enough to where it doesn't feel like it's a complete chore for you to show up every day. And that's your main job, and your side hustle, that's where you can like really chase your passion, or it could be adjacent to your main job if it's something you love. Like I love programming, so me building websites for people is not a stretch. But
Right.
try a couple of things because just doing working one main job, you're really setting yourself up for hard times because now you could be let go at the drop of a dime, and now they got the AI stuff coming in.
Yeah. Well, and what was tough for me was that like I sort of was a natural at programming. I used to program when I was like 9 or 10 years old. and stuff like Visual Basic, Q Basic. And so I took the programming from a very young age. Then I took a long break away from it doing music. But then when I came back to programming to do a boot camp, I found it very difficult because, obviously a language like Java or C++ is very different than like using Dreamweaver to create a website or creating, a basic app in QBasic or stuff like that. So it's tough to say. You never really know what's going to work out in the end, but I think what we're getting at here is passion. You have to have passion for whatever it is you're doing, especially as a side hustle. But it'd be nice to even have passion for what you're doing as a main hustle too. So like that's why I kind of gave the advice like sit down and really think about like what would you be good at, what do you have at least some interest in, and then go get a bachelor's for that. Like that'd probably be the best advice I could give myself if I go back in time. Like because I never finished college. I went to school for 2 years and then moved to LA with an indie rock band at 22 and kind of never looked back from there.
Yeah, to extend on that, I would also say just try something out. Like instead of a lot of people, they think all this stuff in their mind. They think like, oh, I need to have everything figured out perfectly before I start. No, you just need to start, and then you'll figure it out later. Like especially with your side hustle because your income is independent.
Oh yeah.
Like even with this podcast, like who you didn't have it in your mind. Hey, I want to be a podcaster, but just from you trying it out, you're able to talk to like people you would have never been able to talk to before. So.
Oh no, I mean that element of it is fascinating. And like before I started this podcast with you, I just consider myself, very introspective, very introverted, very shy. A lot of musicians are very, very shy people. And so I never thought like that I could do a podcast, or I never thought I could see myself doing a podcast or a radio show. But we did one episode as like a trial run, and I really enjoyed it. I got a lot out of it, and so we talked about it more, and like, all right, like let's bring you on board. And it's been very fluid, since me coming on board. We've done really well, and I've been able to book some really great guests for the show. I've had a lot of fun talking to a lot of different people, whether that be tech industry, game industry, music industry, just a lot of very highly intelligent, very creative people we've been having on here. And just to get to chat to people like that, you don't get to chat with people like that every day. So it is a unique experience. And there's definitely, as a side hustle, I have a lot of passion for it, which I think you do as well.
Yeah, exactly. So you're basically just pick something and try it out. And, if it doesn't work, make an alteration to your plan, try something different. And then, if that doesn't work, you can always end up trying another thing, but you just have to actually do something. I think that's for me.
And I guess like what I was trying to say before about the programming is like, I took the programming. I, was able to create websites pretty easy and like WordPress or more like Dreamweaver, stuff like that. Like that came easy to me. But, once you actually get a full-time job and now you got to program 40 hours a week, that's very different than your boot camp that you go to, or that's very different from your self-studying and like working on websites as a hobbyist. Like now all of a sudden 40 hours a week, you're coding nonstop. Like that to me was overwhelming, and I burnt out like very, very quickly because of that.
I think the good thing though is at least you tried it out and got it in your head like, hey, this isn't for me because I did it firsthand, and just.
Well, that's the silver lining, Kevin. Is like, okay, I gave it a fair chance. I went to school, I went back to school for it, I got a school loan, Did a lot of when I graduated with certification in Java Spring, but they weren't hiring entry level for Java roles at that time. This is back in like 2021 after the pandemic. They
Mm-hmm.
were mainly hiring for front end React and front end Angular. So I had to go out and learn those skill sets just to get a job.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, at least at least you gave it a fair shot. You learned the good and the bad parts, and learned that it wasn't for you. Now you got that out of your mind, and you moved on to back
Yeah,
to
it's like
music.
I got it, I got it out of my system. I gave it a fair go. It didn't work out. I found it, I mean, I ended up started to drink. I hadn't drank in years. I started drinking just to deal with the stress from the job, and to me, that was a signal. This is not what you should be doing. Yes, you can make a lot of money in programming. Yes, programming is a great career path, but if you don't have that gusto, that mojo, that's something that's pushing you to learn more every day, to get better and better, because that's what programming requires. It requires that you be adaptable. So I think it's programming is for a certain type of personality, I would say.
Yeah, I think pretty much everything has people who are more naturally acclimated towards it. Like for me, accounting is just not for me. Doesn't gel with my personality. Whereas some people they love it. So the only way to know is just by actually giving it a shot, seeing if you like it. And if it doesn't, well, at least you learned about yourself and learned like, hey, this is not for me, and it kind of pushes you more
Yeah.
towards that which is.
And I'm sure in your case, you probably figured, okay, go to school for accounting. This is going to be like a very practical thing to do, a practical job. But then you end up hating it, and you can't imagine working 40 hours a week doing that.
Yeah, that would have been a nightmare. So it's good. It's good that at least I got it out the way. That was supposedly one of those stable, good paying professions, but you learn like it's not about just the money or whatever. Like because you're gonna be at work the majority of your life. So if you hate what you're doing, you're gonna hate your life.
See, that was the problem with programming. Like I was doing it, 100% for the money, and I just figured, oh well, I used to program as a kid, but I had no idea how hard like Java was or C++ was. Like when you really get into it, like these are, like juggernaut languages. These are really difficult languages to learn and to use and to utilize. So, at the end of the day, I'm glad that I had music as a side hustle to propel me into doing music full time at one point. Like when I was living in LA for a while, I was doing music full time and I got a lot of enjoyment out of that. And now it's back to being a side hustle again. But it's kind of nice, I have free time. I have time to network with for the podcast, to get guests on the podcast, because that takes a lot of work. Networking, at the end of the day, networking takes up a lot of hours. And you're just kind of doing, I mean, at its core, it's pretty basic. You're just messaging people, booking people, making sure someone's the right fit for the show. So in that way, it's very basic, but it is time consuming. Don't get me wrong, it is time consuming, and if I didn't have multiple side hustles, I wouldn't be able to do all the networking for the podcast. So I think, that's the thing. If I had like a main hustle right now, we wouldn't even be doing this podcast because I wouldn't have the time to book the guests. So, I think everything happens for a reason, Kevin.
Yeah.
And I think, this podcast, it's coming together very nicely, very quickly since I joined on board. And I think we've got a lot of really cool experiences, a lot of cool experiences to come. And I think just a lot of positive experiences as well.
Yeah, exactly. Pretty much got to let God guide your path and just go out there and do what you need to do. That's my closing advice. You have any
Yeah, I
closing
think.
thoughts?
Well, I think yeah. You like you said, like you do what you can. You do the best job that you can. You put your all into whatever your work is. You know, I don't care if you're a plumber, an electrician, a web developer. Like, you know, you say, okay, this is my main thing. I'm gonna do this. You know, full steam ahead, and that should really be what matters at the end of the day, that you're finding something that you could really get behind and really enjoy. If we're talking main hustle, side hustle, you know, that's a little bit different, but main hustle, you really got to find something that is not just about the money. There's got to be something in there that you enjoy enough to propel you to build a career in that very thing. And I guess that's really all I would say, Kevin.
I think that's a good note to end this one on. Man, thank you everybody for tuning in. We'll catch y'all next time. Peace.
All right, guys, thanks.